Hello. All good gifts around us are sent from heaven above. Then thank the Lord, oh thank the Lord for all his love. On Sunday we'll be celebrating Harvest at Christ Church, remembering God's great goodness to us in all that he provides for us. Celebrating harvest is important in a society which has less and less contact with agriculture. I know some children grow up with almost no idea of where food actually comes from. It just comes out of the supermarket. Harvest helps us to remember that it is God who provides for us. To help us think about that, let me read a well-known passage from the Old Testament book of 1 Chronicles. David praised the Lord in the presence of the whole assembly, saying, "Praise be to you, Lord, the God of our father Israel, from everlasting to everlasting. Yours, Lord, is the greatness and the power and the glory and the majesty and the splendour. For everything in heaven and earth is yours. Yours, Lord, is the kingdom. You are exalted as head over all. Wealth and honour come from you. You are the ruler of all things. In your hands are strength and power to exalt and give strength to all. Now, our God, we give you thanks and praise your glorious name. But who am I, and who are my people, that we should be able to give as generously as this? Everything comes from you, and we've given you only what comes from your hand." King David was established in Jerusalem, his capital, and was preparing for the building of the temple, where God's people would come to worship. It was his son Solomon who was actually to build the temple, but David prepared the plans and raised the money. And now David praises God. So where does David begin? He begins by celebrating the truth about God. Praise be to you, Lord, the God of our father Israel, from everlasting to everlasting. And then, yours, Lord, is the greatness. At this time, David was a great world leader, but that was nothing compared to the Lord. It isn't just that God is great, he defines greatness. Whatever is the greatest thing you can think of, even the universe itself, God is greater. It would be impossible for anything to be greater than him. And the power. David was the most powerful king of his time, but that was nothing compared to the Lord. Whoever is the most powerful person you can think of, maybe Joe Biden or Vladimir Putin, they are nothing compared to the Lord. Whatever is the most powerful thing you can think of, the heart of a great star maybe, it's nothing compared to his power. And the glory and the majesty and the splendour. Think of whatever is most wonderful to you. Now multiply it by 1,000,000 times, and you still have not reached how wonderful God is. What do you think of God? David had big thoughts about God. He recognized just how amazing God is. These weren't David's opinions about God. He wasn't saying, "I like to think of God like this." This is a true description of God, a God who is so great he is beyond our ability to describe. 50 or 60 years ago, J.B. Phillips wrote a book called "Your God is Too Small." And it is a constant challenge to us as Christians. We forget how great God is. We tend to try to domesticate God, to shrink him until we can understand him. But instead of doing that, it is good to just stop and be overwhelmed by his greatness and glory. This is your God. And when you have that big view of God, it puts everything else into perspective. Wealth and honour come from you. You are the ruler of all things. In your hands are strength and power to exalt and give strength to all. David doesn't claim anything for himself. All that he has come from the Lord. And I do think that that's something that we regularly need to be reminded of. We need to be reminded that actually all good gifts around us do come from heaven above. The food that we have to enjoy may come from around the world. It may mostly come in tins and packets, but still ultimately, if it wasn't for God's generous hand, we would have nothing. And of course, not just our food. There is nothing that I have that I can think is mine by right. All good gifts come from God. On the day which 1 Chronicles 29 records, there had been a great collection for the work of building the temple. If we'd read a bit earlier, we'd have seen that David and the rest of the people gave 270 tons of gold and 575 tons of silver, plus lots of other stuff. That's not a bad collection. But look at what David says. But who am I? And who are my people that we should be able to give as generously as this? Everything comes from you, and we've given you only what comes from your hand. Instead of being full of self-confidence, David is just amazed that God had given them all of this in the first place so that they could give it back to him. But it isn't just that everything comes from God. In verse 11, David says, everything in heaven and on earth is yours. Then in verse 14, he says, everything comes from you. Put those two statements together, and it is again a reminder that even though God has given everything to us, ultimately it is still his. It isn't as though God gives to us and then it's ours to do what we want with. Everything is God's. He has given it to us, but he still owns it. That's what David realized. Whatever God gives to us, he still has the right to expect us to use it in a certain way. And that's good to be reminded of us at Harvest as well. God has been good to us. He has given us so much, but he wants us to use it in a way that honours him. Everything I have, everything you have, God has given. Faithful discipleship involves not only recognizing that all we have has come from him, but in remembering that he has entrusted it to us so that we can use it for him and for his glory.